Ladies and gentlemen, our program will now begin. Please welcome the CEO of the Churchill Club, Karen Tucker.
Thank you so much. Hello, and welcome to the Churchill Club. Tonight we are privileged to have with us Peggy Johnson of Qualcomm and Greg Maffei of Liberty Media. Welcome and thank you very much for being here, Peggy and Greg. We recently discovered that the two of them, who are two diverse and incredibly accomplished industry leaders, actually have a number of interests in common, things like mobile technologies, media, and entertainment. So we invited them to come and speak to one another and to all of us here about where they think we're headed, where some of the prime opportunities are for innovation, for economic growth, and they agreed. And here we are with an amazing evening of fresh thinking and maybe even some aha moments ahead of us. Our thanks to Qualcomm, particularly Greg LeBeau, for their partnership in making this event possible. We really appreciate it. Thank you. For our new guests in the audience, a brief introduction to Churchill Club, a nonprofit devoted to innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. It began in Silicon Valley in 1985 as a forum where important people say important things at the nexus of business and technology, academia, and policy. And since then, its scope has broadened just as the expanding role and impact of technology itself on so many aspects of our world. We convene up to 40 programs each year to advance collective thinking and insights around leadership, trends, implications, strategy. And we encourage our speakers to say something that matters and build on what's already been discussed rather than repeating it. So we certainly welcome you to join, participate, and remain close to the extraordinary conversations that we convene on a regular basis. And I would also like to say hello to one of Churchill Club's two co-founders, Tony Perkins, who is with us in the house tonight. Our next program will be held on April 16. It's about new perspectives on engineering great products and customer experiences with leaders from LinkedIn, Google, Global Logic, and others. On April 22nd, we'll take a look at the future of work. Reid Hoffman and Joy Ito will be here on May 19, and the 16th annual Top 10 Tech Trends will be held on May 29. So please keep a close eye on us and join us when you can. If you're tweeting, please use the hashtag Churchill Club. You'll find other Twitter codes in your printed program, and Peggy has a new one. It's @PeggyJ. Let's now introduce our speakers. Peggy Johnson is Executive Vice President at Qualcomm Technologies and President of Global Market Development. There, she thinks a lot about things like commercializing new business opportunities, running innovation programs, exploring new market segments, and strategic relationships. She sits on Qualcomm's executive committee and also on the board of Live Nation Entertainment, which is an organization that she and Greg Maffei have in common. And Peggy is an engineer by training. Liberty Media CEO Greg Maffei leads a powerhouse mass media organization with interests in some of the world's most respected media, entertainment, and digital commerce companies. Greg sits on the board. He's chairman of TripAdvisor, SiriusXM, Starz, and Live Nation. He's on the board of Charter, Zillow, Barnes & Noble. So his catbird seat is particularly broad, I would say, relative to all the things that are going on out in the world around that those domains. So without further delay, let's give our warmest Churchill Club welcome to Peggy and Greg.
So I think this is payback.
Uh-oh.
I met Peggy probably about 7 years ago when Qualcomm was trying to develop a mobile TV service, and they came and visited us, and we at Liberty Media told them why we thought it was going to be really tough and why it wasn't going to work. And
we didn't listen to any of it.
they didn't listen to us one bit, but they had a lot of great spectrum. So despite all the money they lost trying to create the TV service, they eventually sold the spectrum and made a ton of dough. Later on, we sued her. It was just a little lawsuit. And, they were trying to jam some standards boards or something.
We weren't doing anything
whatever.
of the sort. I knew this was going to start off this way.
So I liked her so much with all that process of the little lawsuit that we put her on the Live Nation board, where she's been a great contributor. And how long have you been on the board now?
I'm actually getting ready to go to my 3rd board meeting this week.
And you survived.
I survived.
There's
It's
a
an
guy named
interesting
Ari Emanuel
board.
on the board.
It's an interesting board.
And, she missed the first, Ari wasn't at the first board meeting, but the F word is about every 3rd word out of his mouth.
Yes,
so
it
she's had trial by fire.
It is. In fact, I was, the other day, I got to tell my story from meeting Bono. I'm Irish descent, and I was at a dinner with the Prime Minister of Ireland, and he brings Bono with him. I mean, who does that? I was just like, oh my God, Bono just walked in the room. Actually, Bono just came on board with Live Nation. So I was like, what do I have in common with him? Well, I'll say I'm on the Live Nation board, and you're now part of our artist management group. And so I brought that up, and I have the Prime Minister here and Bono there, and he says, well, how do you like the board? And I said, I like it a lot, except, they kind of use the F word a lot. And he goes, they effing do what? Like that. It's like classic Bono. We bonded there. But so Greg, we were trying to figure out when we first met. It's gone back many years. But I did learn something new about Greg this past week. We were with a group of people skiing, and I learned that he only likes to ski. I was in his group, for better or worse. He only likes to ski double diamonds, preferably through the trees, crazy stuff. And he always has to be down first, which was bothering our guide. He'd be like, where's that guy Greg? I'm like, oh, he's down there. So I had to deal with that all week. That tells you a little bit about Greg's personality, which is a good one, and he is a true winner. But since you got to go first all last week, I'm going first tonight. And I'm going to start it off. So there's a gentleman named Mike D'Angelo. He's the film critic for Esquire. And he made an interesting comment the other day. He said he had actually just downloaded 2001: A Space Odyssey to his handset, his smartphone, and he wanted to know what is it like to watch a movie on your smartphone. And what he found out was very surprising. It was actually pretty good. He was in a coffee shop, he was watching it, it was at a bus station, and it was pretty good. And he kind of had an aha moment where he said, Hollywood is no longer in competition just with TV or gaming consoles or the internet. I mean, mobile is everywhere. Mobile is the world. Hollywood is in competition with the world. And to me, that suggests that mobile is the new media king. But I'm in the telecom sector, you're more in the media sector. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, it's yes and no. To me, it seems like part of a larger trend. I give this talk about how all these businesses have been changed by technology, but few have been changed by as much as the media business, and the intersection of the internet and Moore's Law and what that's done to the media business and how that's just begun. Well, this is a prime example. And one of the things I talk in that, or use in that thing is, if you downloaded a movie, your example was
Space Odyssey.
Space Odyssey.
Yeah.
And you looked at what it cost to download, and I go through the statistics on what the download cost would have been, what the storage cost would have been, what the processing cost would have been in 1978, and roughly all these things are measured either in tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. Now the device is measured in a couple of $100. The download cost is measured in pennies. And if you roll forward 25 more years, and you just look at the obvious impact, and the people in this room know it well, everything will be measured in pennies or virtually inconsequential. And so to the degree that mobile today is the intersection of both that connectivity and that processing power coming together, and if it doesn't win and crush all of the traditional forms today, it surely will in 25 years. You've got just such a tailwind. And contemplating what that means to the media business in that kind of instant connectivity, free device, free storage, I'm probably happy I won't be there in 25 years to figure out what it means.
Well, it's interesting. Google did a survey a while back where they asked the question to different groups around the world, if you had to give up TV or your smartphone, how many of you would give up TV in favor of your smartphone, was the way it was worded. In the US, it was 36% of the people. But in China, it was 60% of the people. So there's an interesting dynamic there, particularly in areas where mobile is many times their first consumer electronics device.
So part of that is because we are the kings of television in the United States, right? If you look at what happened from 1975 to 85 to 95 to 2005, the average household went from watching 4.5 hours a day to 5.5 to 6.5 to 8. And now it's about stalled. And of course, the definition of what is television, my 15-year-old son doesn't watch much television, but he seems to stream a hell of a lot of stuff on his laptop or his iPad. So the definition of television changes. But we've probably seen the peak of that. And around the rest of the world, there's nothing like that. There's no place, the average cable bill in the United States just for video is, I don't know, 60, 70 bucks. There's no place in the world like that. The US is a totally different experience. So all these other places are going to come at it from a very different kind of perspective. They're not looking at, that kind of world of television owning and from changing from television. They're looking at they never had television in that way.
Right.
And the last thing I say, the perversity is we are actually in some ways in the golden age of television, right? You've never had more quality television shows. You've never had more money invested. The idea that somebody would spend 5 or even perhaps because they were nutty on Netflix was nutty on how they did House of Cards for a bunch of reasons, $10 million an hour. That doesn't exist. That never existed. We have more people, 40 or 50 networks trying to compete for quality television at the same time as you're seeing the wave peak and what happens in terms of how much that's going to get consumed going forward, the perversity of those two things coming together.
So from the mobile side, and some of you are probably familiar with these numbers, but there's about 7 billion mobile connections in the world, in a world of about 7 billion people or so. But about half of those are unique connections. And so there's still quite a runway for sort of the rest of the world to be connected. But from where we sit at Qualcomm, it's fast condensing. It's going, in the matter of a short period of time, several years out, literally nearly everybody is going to have access to a mobile phone. And of those 7 billion connections today, roughly a third of them are 3G or 4G, so capable of receiving video and having a good experience. And what we've found is, products are iterating so fast, but in the cell phone, in the handset, they're super fast, super fast. There's always something new coming in. And just from our own perspective, the video and the audio quality that are coming in, things like 7.1 surround sound, so just with a simple set of speakers, you have sort of a home theater experience. All of the multimedia, the GPU, the graphic capability is just exploding. And it's coming not just from Qualcomm, from all areas of the industry. So now you have a device, a really good device, a really good user experience in almost everyone's hands. And I mean, how do you see that changing the way Hollywood looks at it, the way content providers look at the platform?
Well,
is that the go-to platform at some point?
I think it's not, mobile phones are not yet the go-to platform for media consumption. They are the go-to platform, in my judgment, for a whole bunch of other kinds of behavior. I mean, we were talking earlier, I'm on the board of Zillow, and it's very logical that when people do house searches on Zillow, that well over half of them, probably closer to 3/4, are on mobile devices. You're driving around on Sunday, you look at this house, that's logical. What's less logical, or seemingly less logical to me, is that they have a mortgage product where you can check and rates and be pre-qualified. Over half the searches for mortgages are on mobile, which isn't necessarily something you think about intuitively that you need to be doing on the road or doing it this way. So obviously, for lots of things, I think the mobile is going to, is well on its way to owning stuff. And we have a more traditional shopping media service, TV shopping, called QVC. QVC is now up to 45% internet in the US. So internet, even in something which is an older audience than the traditional Valley type audience, and something which skews massively female, 90-95% women, not necessarily early technology adopters, is 45% internet. And even within the 45%, more than a third of that, probably 35+%, is mobile. So mobile is taking over lots more, it seems to me, shopping in a lot of lines of applications before it's taken over yet the media viewing experience. But that will change, and you're seeing people start to really build on, that. But let me throw something back at you, Peggy, which is maybe a little off. But so we've had these big punctuated changes in how, mobile phones have gotten so much better. But it doesn't feel like over the last couple of years that, is there a big jump coming? Because it's not obvious that, sorry, we had an Apple at the table. The iPhone 5S is a big improvement over the iPhone 5. Or what I read about the 6 is going to be a massive improvement over the speculation about the 6. I get that Android is caught up in a lot of ways, but is there something that's like this big leap on the next one that you see?
So one area that we see starting to formulate is the idea of your phone being contextually aware of your surrounding. And by that I mean, knowing that you're at this place at this time, knowing something about you, it feeds you up a set of information, data relevant to you right at that place and at that time. I think one of the things our current phones suffer from a little bit is just this lots and lots of features, so many features, and really good features. Like some of our camera features are unbelievable. The facial recognition, the smile detection, the things that are, there's an unbelievable list in our camera suite. Does everyone know about those? I don't know. Are we exposing them right? And it gets back to what Apple did so well was that user experience. Okay, with this just storm of features in a device, are we exposing them to the user in the right way? So I think things like contextual awareness can help with that. You're not giving them all the information.
You're a little bit saying, maybe I'm hearing what I want to hear, but you're a little bit saying what I think, which is, like I was at Microsoft, you make Microsoft Office, it's great, and then you add the next new set of features in Microsoft Office and 4% of the users use them. Are we in the same, a little bit in the phones where, what's being added, the difference between the next one, and the download on iOS 7.1 managed to kill the battery life of a poor battery life to begin with. We were hearing, I like to ski, do not ski with this device. I mean, it's at 75 and then it's at 35 5 minutes later, right? It's not respond well to cold. Put all that aside, busting on the apple on my table.
Excuse me for that, I'm sorry. Michelle.
We were busting on at the table about what's wrong with this thing. But put all that aside, I mean, each of those features, I mean, are we at the point where there's something that is going to be, and you don't know the revolution until it comes, but is there something which is truly going to change and not just be evolutionary that you guys see at the moment?
Okay, so let me get back to contextual awareness. So one of the things, we've been working with the leagues on this idea of beaconing out information, just in a tight proximity, just stuff that's important in that tight proximity. And so we tried it out at Sun Life Stadium at a Miami Dolphins versus Chargers game, which we ended up not winning, but setting that aside, we had a great trial there with them. But basically, you come into the stadium, you're bombarded with a lot of things. Some you're interested in and some you aren't. But this ability, they have a Miami Dolphins app, but the ability to put information into the app that I allow, that stays on my phone, that knows something about me, and then as I'm walking through Sun Life Stadium, different things are beaconing out. And my phone is doing the filtering for me. I don't have to say, okay, where's my seat, where's the beer, where's this, that, the other. It's my phone is being that filter. And I think it goes to, again, what Apple did so well, that user experience. We have the opportunity now with contextual awareness, with radios in our environment, with that processor in our handsets being so powerful, to filter out what's important to us and to make it, my experience at Miami Dolphin Stadium, Sun Life Stadium, much better than it might be without that, and make yours better and custom and unique to you, because they know something about Greg Maffei. So I think that's
probably to their detriment. But okay.
Yeah, you don't want to know too much. I think there's definitely an opportunity there, for a whole new set of thought around that. And what I like to say is, we at Qualcomm, we kind of tee some of these things up, and then it's like, okay, developer community, what can you do with this? What could you do if you have a set of beacons in your environment? How will that help your retail business? How will that help, the leagues? In just about any area, you can, security, privacy, there's all sorts of interesting things. So, do you want me to throw one back at you?
Sure.
Because I got one.
Seems fair.
So, What's interesting to us, because we are a mobile company, is we're mobile first, we're born mobile, we like to say. We are, we think about mobile, obviously, every day. That's what we do. That's our roots. But when I look at a lot of the companies over the past 5 years or so, 5 years ago, so many of them didn't have a mobile strategy. And I think it was in the summer of 2012 when Mark Zuckerberg said, we're mobile first. We're mobile first. And he went to the different teams and said, what's your mobile strategy? Each of you better have a mobile strategy because we're going to be mobile first. And he pivoted, that was like just over 18 months ago or so. And he pivoted, and now 53% of their revenues come from mobile. Does everyone get that? I mean, I have to say, sometimes in the media world, I don't know that I hear that sentiment as much.
Well, again, I think, a lot of times it's still an ancillary viewing device. It's not the primary viewing device, and things are not formatted and driven around that.
But, to butt in, couldn't you be, and I will.
Why should today be any different?
Yeah,
Peggy, go ahead.
I'm butting in. I mean, we are all sitting now in front of our TV with our devices. Don't you want to interact? Don't you want to know that it's me sitting there? And don't, so it seems like there's such an avenue of opportunity, but they're not really taking it yet by the reins.
Well, you're saying among traditional media companies?
Yes.
If you look at where most of their revenue comes from, it's not from those kind of sources. It just isn't. Yeah, the monetization on those is still very low as a percent. Now, if you're Facebook, which they think, I was talking to someone, they think that 25% of the average person's time on a smartphone is being consumed in Facebook. That just, that's crowding out a whole bunch of other stuff. To your point, as example, the media business is competing with a whole bunch of other things. Mm-hmm. But it's still, not where they're being paid big money to watch that on that device. It's just not the driver. And maybe the industry's behind, but that's not the focus yet.
Yeah. Since you're a little bit in the media industry with Charter, do you mind if I ask you what's going on in the consolidation of the cable industry, and where do you think that's headed?
Well, I think you're seeing, the cable business is challenged by rising content costs, and the cable business, the reality is that each of these content companies, the strong ones, an ESPN or a Discovery or a CBS with the power of retrans, has an enormous amount of leverage on the distribution companies, the cable MSOs. And that could be just as well be the satellite companies or the telcos who've built out either fiber or some form of DSL, VDSL to deliver video. And that price, the price that they have been handed to offer ESPN is rising much faster than they're able to put through those costs. So part of the motivation for all this is to get scale. But in addition, and it's power against the content guys, but in addition, there's just huge benefits to scale in marketing costs and connectivity costs in a whole bunch of related ways and values. So I think you're going to see, to the degree that it's allowed and permitted, you'll see massive consolidation in these kind of companies. And I think you'll see different forms of consolidation. I'm willing to bet the satellite companies will attempt it again. They attempted it once before. You can imagine some of the fiber players thinking about how they scale up. In these high fixed cost, low variable cost businesses, other than that content, once you got it in the ground, the only big variable cost is content. So getting power against them and trying to get scale is going to drive a lot of consolidation to the degree the government lets it.
So here's an idea. From our perspective, we see this data tsunami coming. Everybody's using more and more video. I mean, it's about half the mobile internet right now, going to 70% in a few years. The government isn't freeing up enough spectrum. There is spectrum out there to be freed up.
In the wireless side.
In the wireless side, yeah. And it's a slow process, and it's a stepwise process. And so when we look at the usage of data and where we see it going, we think it's going to double about every year for the next 10 years. So we think, we will need 1,000 times more capacity in our wireless networks than we have today. How do we get it? There's not enough spectrum not freed up, that even if they freed up every bit of it, that it could deal with that. So we see an interesting opportunity with the cable cos because they have lots of backhaul sitting there,
Yep.
and they have their service on it. What about another service where we can use kind of a mix of wired and wireless to offload opportunistically? And the means of doing that would be what is sometimes called small cell. So taking that macro cell, making it very small, moving it very close to you so you can reuse the frequencies in between. We think that's an interesting opportunity for the cable cos. Is that something that they see as it's a kind of incremental or a whole new business?
No. Well, I think
there's some interesting business models around that as well, right? Because
Yeah,
it
well,
could be
take the broader,
wholesale thing.
than your small cell. I mean, I think if you look, the cable companies, it's another reason which leads to consolidation because it's easier to cooperate with yourself than with other people.
I found that to be
The
true.
cable companies are definitely, I think, interested in trying to move to being a Wi-Fi platform. And you've seen this in people who have regional monopolies. Cablevision's the best example. Tom Rutledge, who runs Charter, used to run Cablevision. You know, they were able to because they were contiguous in one market, able to offer Wi-Fi. Something like, I've heard a statistic, and you probably know that, so I don't have to make it up, you can tell me if it's true. Something like 75% of all mobile usage, smartphone usage, is actually inside in a place where you could offload to Wi-Fi. And to the degree that you're able to use, and it's the best networks in general are the cable networks, the broadest networks in the nation. You offload a bunch of that traffic to Wi-Fi. That's an enormous opportunity to free up spectrum or redivert some of that usage to a platform which can handle it. So I think there's a great opportunity for the cable companies to the degree they can cooperate to provide a nationwide Wi-Fi service and offload a bunch of traffic from the stressed wireless or mobile networks.
Mm-hmm. So we have an idea of kind of like an inside-out opportunity. So if you have that device in your home, and whether it's the femto or the set-top box or wherever it has the radios in it, there is an opportunity to go. Macro networks are kind of these big towers that go from the outside in to the houses, and sometimes it's difficult to get through walls and things like that. So there's that issue. But if you had a cell inside and it sort of bled outside, so there's a little bit of coverage out there, then you can start to think about ad hoc networks. And if you were today getting ready to deploy a network of your own, you might think about starting there rather than, okay, I'm going to deploy 30,000 cell sites across the country. I got to find spots for them outside. That's harder and harder to do. And I think that's something we may see in some of the emerging markets as some of these big chunks of spectrum open up and the opportunity is there. But that's where I think then you start to have some interesting business models. It's a mix of wired and wireless, and there's traditional business models might get turned upside down a bit.
Well, I think that's entirely possible. It kind of exemplifies another thing that I think is the strength of the Valley and is the strength of companies like Qualcomm. And you know, back to my digital King Kong eats, the media Godzilla. The technology business is a worldwide business. It's a global business. You know, I was at Microsoft, well over 50% of our revenue and higher percentage of our profits were from overseas. There's no media company that's like that. You know, there's some media companies which are international, start out there, but there's no U.S. domestic-oriented media company that has that kind of focus. The breadth, most content started as local, maybe it gets to national. You're seeing more of it move overseas, but it's small. And again, the monetization of media content overseas is very small compared to what we're willing to pay in the United States. So all that is small. In a lot of ways, the media business gets superseded by the technology business because of the global aspect. Not only do you have Moore's Law and the ancillary benefits working on your behalf in technology, you get to play in a global marketplace. And that's a huge disadvantage for the media business.
Right. So speaking of, new business models, we have OTT, or over-the-top players. Netflix, Hulu, all those guys they were about $8 billion of revenue in 2012. The prediction is in 2015 it'll be about $20 billion of revenue. So obviously a lot headed that way. You have people like Dish, who just did an interesting deal with Disney, where they now have the rights to run Disney content on smartphones, tablets, PCs. That's a big deal. I don't know, that didn't maybe get as much attention as it should. That's a huge deal. That's a huge deal. Charlie can't hop over ads anymore, I guess. That was the deal. That was part of the deal.
Charlie's good at, putting forth things to annoy people just enough to cut him a better deal.
He's a good guy, though. I like him a lot. But that kind of shifts things there. Wow, a satellite player heading off into
look, if you
internet TV.
If you write the horrible scenario before you get to where they do it themselves, which I think is a good question about what the cable companies or the satellite companies do, you write the scary scenario for cable. It's the scenario where more and more of the traffic moves over the top. It's Netflix primarily, and Netflix is largely a failure of the US cable companies because TV everywhere should be superset and kill Netflix if that had been executed well. But Netflix does that. You lose revenue from cord cutters and cord shavers. So you're losing revenue on the side of you're not getting as much revenue as you should. You're still getting pressed on content costs. So this is the negative cycle. You're still getting pressed on content costs. And worse, the over-the-top guys are now stressing out your network. During prime time, Netflix is somewhere between 30 and, depending on the market, 30 and 50% of the data downloaded. And let's imagine that you don't get able to charge for that. You're not able to charge extra to the consumer because usage-based pricing gets limited, and you're not able to charge extra to the content companies who are consuming your network, so you're strained on both sides. And you watch where Google Fiber and people like that lay into some of the best markets, and they cherry pick, right? Google Fiber is not required to do what cable companies are required to do. They get to redline neighborhoods, cherry pick the best neighborhoods, and say, hey, I'm going to take those high margin ones and leave all the other ones behind. And so if you're a cable company, your worst fear is that negative cycle where you're losing video revenue, strained on costs, losing the potential to price your bandwidth the way you'd like, and losing some of your best markets. And that negative cycle is very scary. So a lot of media companies and a lot of cable companies or satellite companies are rightly looking at, hey, what should we be doing? I mentioned already TV Everywhere, which would have said basically, if you're an authenticated subscriber, everything that you get on your TV, you get on your mobile device, wherever you are. It's a great way to manage churn. It's a great way to kill Netflix. It would have. But they couldn't get the licensing together. They couldn't get it all together. And that's just created an enormous opportunity. So a lot of these things you're watching, like Dish trying to do this, or potentially Verizon bought Intel service, talking about what they're going to do mobily over the top, what they're going to do in their own markets. You're seeing these guys trying to play catch up and compete and be over the top themselves before it's done to them. But it is, a lot of momentum has been lost.
So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk about an area that we're very passionate about at Qualcomm, and that is education, mobile devices and education. There's a lot of controversy in this area. Is it good or bad to have devices in the classroom? Does it help or not? And our founder, Dr. Irwin Jacobs, was a professor at MIT and then at UCSD. So we have sort of education in our roots, and we think a lot about it. And we wanted to answer it for ourselves. We didn't want to just listen to the naysayers or the people who said, yeah, it works. We were like, does this work? Do mobile devices really help educational outcomes? And so we've run about 40 projects under our Wireless Reach program, which sort of introduces wireless to underserved communities. And it could just be communities that don't have wireless at all, like education. And we have found that in A/B testing and all sorts of areas of the world, emerging markets, affluent areas, underserved communities, the outcomes are there. We see the outcomes. They're better when kids get to use mobile devices just like we do. I mean, can you imagine going through your day and not, every question you have, just what's the answer? They should be able to do that. And so, we wanted to charge in and say, okay, we can fix this. Let's just put a, mobile device in every kid's hand. But there's a lot of issues with that. There's a lot of issues with that, like what happened in LA City schools, where they handed out iPads, fabulous device, with Wi-Fi, and then a bunch of the kids actually, something like across the nation, about 40% of kids don't have access to broadband at home. So there were some stories, moms were driving them outside McDonald's or Starbucks where they could get some access, and we don't want to create another digital divide. So we have that issue. How do we give kids 7/24 access? Because that is actually where we saw the outcomes really improve. Whether you're on the bus or you're waiting at the orthodontist or whatever, you have the ability to get your questions answered, to do your homework. So this is something that it does affect media companies, because so much of the good content, the digital content, is going to come from media companies that'll run on these devices. But it's just something I ask all of you to think about, that while there are some issues, we firmly believe that the answer is to learn beyond the walls of the schoolhouse and to be able to have 7/24 education and take advantage of things like Khan Academy, brilliant Khan Academy. I use it all the time. It's just like these things our kids should have those. And it's a struggle. You've got poor infrastructure in many of the schools. You've got, the IT department is maybe a part-time mom or dad, maybe, sometimes full-time, but not often. You've got teacher training issues. You've got security and privacy issues. So folks in this room can be a part of that solution, and it's probably going to have to be a sort of a public-private partnership to get there. But it's something you'll be hearing more from Qualcomm. We're right now putting together a framework to address some of those issues, but we can't do it all. And I don't know how you see it, but I can't imagine a world where we go to work and we're just like, oh, there's no smartphones today. How would you do your work? You couldn't do anything.
I had the privilege of sitting on a commission for the governor of Colorado who looked at some of these issues. And if you look what happened, in 1984, they rebalanced all of the CPI. So consumer price index, everything got reset at 100. And if you look at like televisions, they're now at 6. Moore's Law fully in action. If you look at healthcare, it's at 600. And if you look at higher ed, it's like 550, okay? So you've got this massive gap between what the cost per bit delivered of education is and the price per bit charged. Now, not every element has fallen like that. One-to-one in the teacher, tutoring, a lot of elements are not going to fall at that rate. But it's unsustainable that you have this thing moving at multiples of what the CPI is moving at. And it's enormously negative for creating opportunity in the United States. Now, we've had a regime where way too much expense has gone on. While that's been happening, over the last 12 years, we've tripled student debt, okay? Because we let these institutions effectively overcharge for what is delivered with no outcomes-based, test. So while that's going on, and by the way, you can't discharge student debt in bankruptcy. You have a mortgage, and your house is upside down. Nobody in this neighborhood anymore. Housing prices have been bailed out. You can discharge your mortgage. You can discharge your personal credit cards. You cannot discharge student debt. So we're bonding these people with ridiculously overpriced education, which isn't effective, isn't getting them jobs, and letting them overcharged. And so I think MOOCs and variations on that are absolutely required to get the United States moving again. If education is our linchpin, and we have a way to deliver the best education at lower prices, I don't know, there are tons of problems, there's stuff that's got to be worked through, but we're in about the first half of the first inning of a 9-inning game, where back to that Moore's Law, this is going to get solved. A lot of things are going to get solved over time. I personally believe that, the idea of education is kind of you move in, you get start at the beginning of, you matriculate in the fall and you graduate 3 3/4 years later in June, and you got a BS or a BA or whatever it is. That's dead. This is going to be a moving target. There's going to be lots of ways these things get verified, and education, higher ed, is going to get cut and disaggregated 2 ways, both vertically and horizontally, meaning, you aren't necessarily going to get the frat and the football team and all the same things you got over those 3.5 or 3 3/4 years the way many of us did. And you also aren't going to get it all delivered where the classroom and what you get across the, what is done in the tutoring and how the testing works and how you're going to get, both parts are going to get disaggregated. And I think higher ed, as I started out by saying, few businesses have been more impacted by the digital revolution than the media businesses. Few businesses have been less impacted over the last 75 years than higher education. If you look at what were in the Dow Jones index 100 years ago, there's only one company left, General Electric. If you look at what were the highest regarded institutions in the United States 100 years ago, the list pretty much looks like the same list as today's list. There's no place where there's more stasis. I do not believe that will be the case in 25 or 50 years. It's just impossible to imagine.
That was good. Amen. Okay, so thinking about an area that mobile has impacted, one of those obviously is entrepreneurship and the developer community. So, got to throw it out there. Flappy Bird. Did you ever download it? Were you addicted?
Do you think Flappy Bird is an example of, what's both about our common culture, right? People want to be in the minute. People want to be about controversy. And the more noise it made, the more popular it got. And then the faster it collapsed. The cycles on all these things are accelerated, right? How fast did Zynga's games go out? Well, Flappy Bird made them look like eternity, right? These cycles are all just accelerating.
But it's interesting. I mean, going back to our earlier point, the simplicity of it was pretty amazing. And
Yep.
I think, you have people, conjuring up these very difficult games and things like that. And then Flappy Bird comes along and sort of blows up the model. The Guardian had something interesting to say about it because it was very addicting for those of you who downloaded it. It said, they said, one good way to ensure compulsion is to make the user think they can always do better. And then when you don't, you get mad at yourself, and then you just get caught in the loop. I gotta try again, And, maybe if we just had a little dose of psychology, we'd all be writing our own Flappy Birds and making $50,000 a day, as Don Wynn was making. But just going to that point, here's this 28-year-old developer in Vietnam. How does that happen? It happens because he had a mobile phone in his hand, and he developed an app, and those stories are that Arnel Pineda, the guy from Journey, those stories are every day you hear something amazing.
Well, they're leveraging all of that infrastructure, all of that work that's done before, and virality gets accelerated that much faster because all of these things are interconnected. The barriers to entry have come down so much, but they burn out that much faster, right? The cycle aspect is wild to watch.
Yeah. So, thinking of apps, is any interesting apps stand out to you that you were sort of surprised about outside of Flappy
Tinder.
Bird?
I'm way too old, but if you go into a bar, I understand if you go like this to someone, that means, I'd like to meet you if you look at them across the room. Some people in this audience are probably young enough to actually know that. No, we see all, and you're right, so many of them are mobile because the cost to introduce is so low relatively, right? And
Yeah.
they're leveraging the elements that are already there. Tinder is a great example. It leverages mobile, it leverages Facebook, it leverages a lot of human desire that's natural. And those things that are leveraging the existing elements, there's so much infrastructure that's already built that you get to do. And the gatekeepers are way reduced. It used to be you wanted to release a movie, you had to go through the 6 studios. If you wanted to release a show, it had to go through the cable company. That's over. So those barriers are way released. On the other hand, the problem is getting past all the clutter. How do you be the Flappy Birds or the longer term version? And that's the
So,
texture.
talking about releasing a movie, there's an interesting app, one that surprised me because I think it was the highest grossing app in the photography category, called Magistro, I think it is. It's an Israeli company. And basically, you have a bunch of pictures, a bunch of movies on your handset, and you always say, I'm going to do something with them. And you never really do. And they just keep building up. Well, now it will take those. You can just click off which ones you want, movies and pictures. It'll put a theme to it. It'll set it to music, their music or your music. It's great. And in a matter of minutes, it does all that processing. I can't even imagine doing that, anymore when you can do it now in a few minutes. And I don't have to offload it and then open up another program and figure out how do I put the movies in with the pictures and all that. It just does it. And I just did one this weekend. I was in Moab, Utah, which is why I have big big scratch on my leg. I was mountain biking for the first time. Do not recommend it if you've never done it before. In Moab, Utah, which is like the capital of mountain biking. Anyway, some interesting pictures were taken of me falling off the mountain bike, and I gathered them all up and like that. Had a movie. So it's pretty cool what you can do now. And another interesting one is there's an app called Noom, which I think was the #1 rated app in the Google Play Store for a while. And it's basically a personal trainer in your pocket. It has, a cardio meter. It's got a pedometer, a software pedometer. It makes you feel bad if you haven't done things. It's your personal trainer in your ear. And I was thinking we're going through this next wave of where our devices are sort of taking the place of things that we used to have, like cameras and camcorders and things like that. We don't carry those as much anymore. And now, who needs a personal trainer?
So you've been a big advocate of wearables. Do you
Yes.
really think wearables are,
You are not a big advocate of wearables.
I'm less convinced. I mean,
We are.
yeah, the hack that you put the Fitbit on your ankles, so when you bike ride, it
No,
knows.
you put it on your bra. That's a,
We said
That's
this earlier,
right.
and I said that really
Right?
doesn't work for me. But, I don't think, there are a whole bunch of activities that aren't measured that way very well by things like Fitbit, and I like my Fitbit like everybody else, or, maybe you've got a Jawbone or whatever, but they're ineffective. But I also think there's this whole question, and I came from Microsoft where, we always assumed the general purpose device would eat the special purpose devices, particularly with Moore's Law running behind you, that these would get, enough power that they would assume. And by the way, I would have thought you'd be kind of on that same page given your belief in smartphones. So why isn't the smartphone going to eat up most of those wearables?
Because for a couple reasons. One, so we have our TalkWatch, which I'm wearing. It's basically a concept of a smartwatch that incorporated a bunch of technologies that we just wanted to try out and say, for sure, wearables are nascent. It's a new industry. We're still, trying things out. Is it the real estate on our wrist? Is it around your neck? Is it glasses? What is it? And I think we're still answering some of those questions. But in our mind, you have this powerful processor, but where is it? It's in your pocket, it's in your purse, it's not readily available sometimes. And what I've found with the TalkWatch is I get obviously all my text messages, phone calls, I can see who's calling, I can see text message, I can do quick message replies, but also all the notifications from any apps that I want, anything that I have a notification coming from, CNN, which I'm kind of obsessed with that Malaysian airliner thing, so every time there's a notification, did they find it?
What's the Qualcomm theory on what
Yeah.
happens?
Well, it's interesting. That's a whole nother topic,
Okay.
and we have been debating that. Many theories running around, but the fact is, the news comes out, boom, I see it right there. Whether I'm in a meeting or what, I don't have to pull out my purse, get out my phone out. And as you know, when your phone is sitting in front of you, what's the real estate look like? It's black, right? That's the way you kind of want it, so that the battery lasts a little bit longer. And this is always on display. And it gets better in bright sunlight. It's our Mirasol display. And we feel like there's an element that, definitely wearables have to be better than pulling your phone out of your pocket and looking at it, right? Why would you wear them then? So I think that things like always on displays, devices that talk to the powerful device that's in your pocket or purse, that's on the right track. And the other thing we have is wireless power, because I don't know about you, but when I get home at night and I have to find the micro USB, I always do it upside down, at least half the time. So, you're like, where is it? We have a device where you just take it off, set it on the pad, and it charges. It's just wireless, loosely coupled. You don't have to touch it after that. And I think a couple of those things are going to resonate for people who are building wearables.
Maybe.
Such a skeptic.
It seems like another
I'm waiting
thing.
for the Tory Burch Fitbit. I can't wait for that.
Anything Tory
They need
Burch
to be
does is fine with me.
fashionable. They need to be fashionable.
It seems to me a couple things. One, it's just another thing that'll drain more power out of the smartphone, and really improving my
No,
battery life
Bluetooth
of my
LE,
smartphone would be
Bluetooth
better
LE.
yet. One,
That's getting better and better. It's getting better and better.
not yet, but I'll believe. And then the other thing I think is if you look around, and we'll always look, everyone looks to their 13-year-old or their 15-year-old, how many of them actually wear watches? and that's a small percentage. I would argue that you're going to have an adjustment. You better show some real value, because they're not starting with the perspective of, oh, you know, I got this Rolex for my wife 15 years ago and I still have it, and you know, you're going to convince me to take it off and put the smartwatch on. You're going to take the perspective. You're going to take the perspective. I don't wear a watch. Why should I bother?
Yeah, I agree. If it was really a watch, and really a smartwatch is somewhat of a misnomer, it should be, you know, something else, a wearable device or something, because the fact that it's a watch is, oh yeah, that of course you would want it on the wrist to actually show time too, which by the way isn't bad, because how do I find time? I have to press the button on my phone and the screen lights up and then I see the time. This is just, it's 7:50. Which Karen is telling me that I have 10 more minutes left. If I didn't have Karen here, I'd just look at this big watch on my hand. So, you know, but it's all the other capabilities, and it's nascent.
I think it appeals to older people because they can read it without putting on their reading glasses.
Oh, then I don't.
That's the key, but anyway. It wasn't meant to be you, Peggy. I just meant in general.
I want you to know I came in 16th in my age category in this Moab half marathon this weekend.
Very good.
And it was women of a certain age to women of a certain age. In that category, I was 16th, wearing my watch the whole time, getting my messages. But you know, I think it is early, and there's a lot of naysayers. Wearables, I'll never wear them. But you know, I think we're at the start of an industry, much like the cell phone was. But now that we're on start of an industry, you know the question's coming. Bitcoin. I love it.
Peggy's a huge Bitcoin fanatic.
I love it.
But she kept it out of Mt. Gox. Now, where'd you tell me you bought it?
17, yeah. So I'm a believer. I love the little 8-page Satoshi doc. I mean, that thing is elegant. If you guys have ever read the Bitcoin document, it's elegant, it's beautiful. And it just kind of resonated with me. And you know, whether it's Bitcoin or another digital currency.
Cryptocurrency.
Yeah. I mean, that is coming. I believe that's coming. I think then you have a whole other ecosystem around that. There's going to be, you know, the faster ways to transfer and, you know, security, different types of security built in. And I mean, what happened with Mt. Gox, I mean, longer conversation, but, you know, there were issues there. And I think it was Mark Andreessen who said, you know, for the Bitcoin community to survive, a thing like Mt. Gox had to go away. So you want to have the, you know, the feeling of security, the feeling like we were when we first, you know, started using ATMs. You know, is it going to work? You know, it's going to take my card. It's going to take my money. You want to have that confidence that you can transfer money from one person to another.
I have more confidence that it's a store of value and that people are going to treat it as an asset class and want to diversify the way they want to hold gold. They don't want to be dependent upon the U.S. government who can deflate currencies or inflate currencies. And frankly, you know, the biggest tax is on non-Americans who hold currency, right? They hold U.S. dollar, and we get to deflate them and take a rake off them. So I think particularly outside the United States, I can see real appeal for it until it's more stable. And actually, to be fair, it's been relatively stable post Mt. Gox.
Yeah.
But until it's more stable, I think it's hard to see it as a transaction vehicle. I see all sorts of benefits to why it should be a useful transaction vehicle and why it's, but you know, if the pizza costs, translated back into dollars, you know, that cost moves around 10% a day, or you know, even 20% a month. That makes it very hard to buy pizzas or the equivalents until there's more stability in the currency. So I think as a store of value, I get it. I still think as a transaction vehicle, it's tough until it's flatter.
And you know, again, nascent. We're early on in the whole digital currency arena. But my favorite story with you is I was telling him about Bitcoin. And in fact, I was talking to the Live Nation guys. I'm like, you guys got to take Bitcoin, you know? And they're like, yeah, okay, whatever. The new board member wants us to take Bitcoin.
Well,
she's nuts.
Don't you think?
But
don't you think it's mostly been PR value for the companies that are taking Bitcoin today? Hey, it's cheap PR. I take Bitcoin, right?
A lot of people take it, but anyway, so I'm giving them all my, you know, assessment of Bitcoin and telling them all about Bitcoin, and the next day I'm sitting in my kitchen. Turn on CNBC, eating my Cheerios, and there's Greg Maffei on TV, and they say, you're on TV because you were named one of the highest paid CEOs in the U.S., I think was your
Thanks,
badge
Peggy.
of honor.
Anything else you want to raise, Peggy? That's just, you know.
And he says, And they say, well, what do you have to say about that? And Greg says, well, I get paid in Bitcoin. And I'm like, oh, Cheerios.
I argued it was inflated. It was just,
Cheerios flew out of my mouth. It was so funny. I'm like, ah, he listened.
Every time you speak, Peggy, I promise I listen.
So anyway, but I think it's an interesting area, and clearly another one that, it's going to go through its starts and stops. But I think digital currency is here to stay.
So
There's a lot of reasons for having it.
one of the trends I see is I'd be interested if you have a view, or Qualcomm has a view, is, all of these companies which are trying to process assets better, right? And that could be Airbnb, which is you've got a dormant room that's not being utilized. It's obviously versions on Uber, which is saying, okay, we're going to get higher productivity and usage out of cars. I was with somebody who argues that when we get to self-driving cars, nobody's going to need to have their own car because they'll all be ferried around you, and why would you need a car? You'd be part of a fleet. I try to take the counter argument that if you're getting self-driven, you don't need to live in the urban neighborhood. You can live out in the country. What the heck? I'm driving. Somebody's driving me. I can read what I want. I can do whatever I want live further away. So I think there's tension around that one. But clearly there's asset light. The idea that productivity is better. And frankly, we own a bunch of e-commerce companies, and the challenge of trying to not take on assets, trying to be efficient. The best company in our portfolio that we have in the e-commerce portfolio is the one that basically connects vendors and retailers and allows them to drop ship so they're not holding the inventory. Everybody is looking to find ways to be asset light. Does Qualcomm have a view on this? Do you guys have companies that are trying to capitalize on that trend? Do you think I'm just dreaming?
I mean, I have a view on it, and that.
Good.
Absolutely. So I'll give you my view. Actually, I sat next to Brian Chemsky, I think it is, Airbnb. He's Chemsky, yeah. I only saw the CH part of it on his badge, but anyway, he was amazing. And he was telling me the whole story, and I hadn't actually heard the whole story. I knew what Airbnb was. I hadn't heard about the air mattress thing and the whole thing. And the fact that, as he started talking, I'm like, wait a second, you can do this with bikes. You can do this with anything. Like you're saying, you can do that with any asset that's just sitting there, not doing anything. Why not utilize it better? And it actually reminded me of really one of the first businesses at Qualcomm, which was all about asset utilization. It was our Omnitrax business. It was probably actually one of the very first wireless data applications. It went via satellite. It was way before the cell phone networks were deployed. And it utilized that asset, that 53-foot truck, better. Because if it was between LA and Nebraska, in the old days, you didn't know where it was in between LA and Nebraska. And then we put this satellite unit on there, which is kind of an amazing thing. The truck's moving and the satellite's moving, and you had to, find it. There's a steerable antenna. It was pretty cool. But you could then communicate with the truck and reroute the truck and say, oh, by the way, can you swing by, Omaha before you head out of the state because you got another load you can pick up. The drivers initially didn't like it because they felt like it was Big Brother, and then went, wow, I'm making a lot more money, right? So they were being utilized better, the drivers, the trucks. And it just, what's interesting is where will it stop? I mean, what asset would we not want to have utilized better?
Well, and throw in big data, right? Obviously, better understanding of what usage
but
patterns are. You throw in all these trends. I mean, that seems to me that is, if there's one thing that is going to make productivity go up more than anything else, it's that combination of working towards asset light and big data, understanding how usage really is most maximized and effective. I'm sure a lot of what you guys are doing, as you point about, beacons, so understanding real usage patterns, a lot of that plays in very well. But it's just an interesting, to me, trend.
Yep, very, very exciting too. So with that, we thought we could open it up to you. If you have any questions for either of us, anything you would like to ask me about Greg, I'll be happy to answer. I've got stories.
Haven't you already been far too revealing as it is, Peggy? Anyway.
Yeah. Someone back there? There we go.
Sorry. Jessica Williams from Visa. First, Greg, I wanted to tell you if you turn off Tinder while you ski, your phone battery won't die so quickly.
I only looked at Tinder as a social experiment, I promise.
Second, I just wanted to ask about two things. First being sort of the job divide that we're seeing, where a lot of the jobs that people may be qualified to do can be taken over by mobile devices, robots, things of this nature, and how we sort of think about that for the future, where the jobs that we need, people aren't actually getting trained for, and the jobs that we don't need, they are. And then part two being, how do we sort of convince people to move away from creating things like Flappy Bird and move towards more creating apps and things that help society to further itself and to rid itself from some of the things that are plaguing it?
So on the first point, I have some strong feelings about that because I was an engineering major. When nobody ever once said to me as I was going through grade school or high school, hey, why don't you be an engineer? Not a single person. Maybe having to do with my gender, I don't know, but no one ever said anything. So I go off to college, I'm a business major, and just fortuitously, I ran into some people who convinced me to change my major and become an engineering major. And basically, I put myself through college, so I had a fair amount of student loans. And I was just thinking recently, I mean, is it possible that student loans are somehow, or at least the amount, or somehow we tie the major to the student loan? We need engineers. We can't get enough of engineers. Yet student loans are freely given out, and then kids come out of college and they're like, oh, I can't find a job. So is there a way to bridge it through student loans to at least point toward areas, science, the whole STEM area, dying for people? I don't know if that's something that would fly or not, but I feel strongly about trying to figure out how to get kids understanding very early on that the degree that you pick, kind of sets your course in life. And we need some things, and we don't need some other things. And the point about jobs going away, yeah, my family was affected when all the jobs in the aviation industry went away in the 70s. They had to retrain and go do something else. That's what happens. Do we want technology to stop? I don't think so. I feel very strongly about that. And we're still not quite there in this country, even with all of our STEM and trying to encourage kids into those fields. It's difficult. So we have to think of ways, I think, to kind of incentivize them towards that. I don't know how you feel about it.
Yeah, no, I'm pretty much free market oriented. People are going to make their choices, and you think they're going to get educated and move along the way and figure their own. It is interesting. I was thinking about, it's kind of the Lilliputians breaking was it the Lilliputians with Gulliver who broke the mills because their jobs were threatened? It's interesting in this, back to the MOOCs, there were professors at San Jose State who wouldn't teach the Harvard MOOC curriculum because their jobs were threatened, or they claimed it was the quality of the Harvard curriculum. That's kind of like the Seattle City Council, limiting how many cars Uber and Lyft can have, 150 cars between them, I think it was, on the road at any one time. A lot of these are about self-preservation, not about moving forward. And I think you have to believe that individual cases are not always going to be great, and we need some safety net to try and help people make transitions. But you got to believe that in the end, it's the innovation that's going to create these things, and we are going to have disruptions, but it's going to come out the right way, in the main. Doesn't mean every individual transition is going to be easy. And I think the same thing about the apps. The reality is, people are going to create Flappy Birds to the degree that people download Flappy Birds and want to play Flappy Birds, or whatever one it is. And we have a free society where a lot of innovation happens, and we have a free society where people waste a lot of time and money on what others might think are stupid or silly things.
Next question. Do you have any other questions? This one in the back there.
Oh, I got the mic first.
Where is it? But I'll wait to see. Oh, there we go.
Hi, so, whoa, hello.
Hello.
Sorry about that. My name's Emily, and I'm building a wearable company, so I noticed your watch before we even talked about that. And I heard you say that you're really pumped for the Tory Burch Fitbit. I've been wearing different wearables just to test them out and see, and I noticed how huge it is on your wrist. How do you think about the real estate versus the functionality and what you really want to be done? And how do you think that affects the innovation and technology and the chips and things that will be going into those devices and their development?
Well, I think you hit on a very good point, because all the guys at my work love it, and it's kind of big on me. I mean, I've had the smallest. I mean, you sort of fit the band to your wrist, and that was about as small as I could get it, and it's still kind of big. But I like the functionality. So my input to the whole process is just make it more fashionable. Half the population will really appreciate that. And I think what Fitbit's doing with Tory Burch is brilliant. I think maybe the majority of their users are women, and the first ones before they came out, the colored bands, were very functional and everything. But the colored bands, I loved them. I just thought that was, and there was just a handful of colors. It's a great idea. And now the whole Tory Burch thing, you want to be proud of what you're wearing. It says something about yourself. And I think if we only think about the functionality, we're going to completely miss the mark. And of course, there's a lot of men that wouldn't be comfortable with it either. They want to have something on their wrist that they're excited about. We are not a fashion company, so we'll leave that to the real experts. But we think there's a lot of elements of it that can be utilized in the market, so we want to make them known. But I absolutely agree. I think you have to be comfortable with what it is. It's on your body. People are going to see it. It's you.
One of our women vice presidents wore I'm sure it was yours, to your concert last year at CES, and all of these men are coming up to her and saying, "Oh, I love your watch.
Yeah.
It's so cool." And I'm like, "Duh, you're one of the 3 women in the place. It had nothing to do with the watch. Come on." You're at CES. It's 1,000 guys for every woman.
Yeah.
Anyway, guys.
We suffer from that at our party at CES. It's always a big imbalance. Let's see. Next question. I think there's one.
Could you say a little bit about privacy and security in mobile?
Absolutely, yeah. So we feel pretty strongly about this. The question was, can I say something about privacy and security? We have a platform, that context-aware platform called Gimbal, that when we first built it, I remember Paul Jacobs saying, there's always that idea that I'm going to pass by Starbucks and I'm going to say, "I'm passing by Starbucks." And he goes, "I don't want Starbucks to know I'm passing by." Is there a way that we can flip that so only my device knows and the information stays on the device, and I'm just a recipient of inputs and I filter them for myself? And if I want to tell a little bit more about myself, that I'm a runner or something like that, I can, but that's up to me. And so we took that approach when we built the platform, and we feel pretty strongly about that. Clearly, much in the same way as our very first product, that OmniTrax product, when the truck drivers didn't like, people, somebody in their company spying on them and knowing where they were, but if they were making more money, they were okay with it. It should just be a personal choice. And so if I want to let out more and share more, I can. And our kids will probably do more than us, and that, we've heard all those stories, but we feel like it should start with you and let you allow what goes out. And since we have pretty good processors in there, you can do a lot of processing right there and filter right there on the device without pinging back out and getting more information. So, next question. Thought I saw another one over there. No. Okay, are we good then, Karen? Is that?
Oh, there's one over here in the front.
Is there one? Okay, it's hard for me
Somebody
to see.
rescuing us.
Hi.
Yeah.
My name's Dave, and I work in .com business, and I'm curious what you guys think about online advertising. And Peggy, you mentioned about contextual sort of advertising. Are there other things in online advertising that aren't being done yet that will happen soon?
Well, I mean, a lot of what I talked about with the beacons, that's just starting. I think having radios in our environment that talk to our cell phones is going to open up a lot of new retail opportunities, like what happened at Sun Life Stadium. Some interesting things will happen now that we have the ability to filter and also to bring in proximate inputs. An interesting one that I didn't mention at Sun Life Stadium that the vendors said to us is, we wish we could beacon out when it's last call, because we know people want to know that, and we don't know how to get that message out, you know. And if we could do that, we know we'd get one more beer sale in, because people go, oh, last call, I got to go get one beer. And you could do that with beacons. So it just kind of opens up some interesting retail opportunities once you have more radios in the environment. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Well, I think, you know, you're obviously, you've got a ton of tailwind where the amount of which that viewing on media is under advertised compared to the traditional, certainly starting with broadcast television, but even compared to cable television, which isn't as monetized as well. What's interesting to me is how that's all morphing from away from display to other kinds of advertising, and how the blending between content, what is content and what is advertising. So you take Google, how they are stealing more and more of the real estate up the top, squeezing out things, and that's only made more acute as the screen gets smaller on mobile. And what is the answer is embedded with what is advertising. And that, I think that tension is very interesting to see, and what that will do to the appeal of those services.
Yeah. I think we have time for one more question. If
Thierry Doyen with Nokia. You were talking, Greg, about the battery life of the iPhone and so on, and we're still
he's
using...
an expert on it.
No, but we're
It was
still
a personal user, really. It's a bad example.
We're still using the old battery technologies. What can we expect, and how fast, in terms of real breakthroughs in battery?
That's for you, Peggy.
That's me.
No, we have looked at a couple, and frankly, you know, it's very hard to. I mean, we have actually, as kind of a venture play, looked at some of the space. It's very hard to see the ones that are going to, in the near term, going to explode and change the game. But you may have a different view.
Yeah, I mean, some of it is chemistry limited, clearly. But there are some innovations that we've seen that look promising. I think before we see a big revolution in the battery, we're going to see things like just more efficient processing power and doing things you know, a little bit more efficiently in the apps themselves. A lot of the apps are very chatty, way too chatty. They're the ones causing some of the issues. So getting people to understand what they're doing to a network when you're pinging back and forth, I think that's very important. Things like the Mirasol display, which has a very low power consumption compared to regular displays. So I think we may see things around the space before we see the big
Power management.
Power management and processor management and that sort of thing before we see a big shift on the battery side. But there are some promising technologies out there. We've seen some interesting things in the academic world that, you know, given some resource behind it, could actually solve that. So with that, I think we have to close for the evening. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Peggy.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing your perspectives and things that are top of mind for you. It's a very insightful conversation. Maybe we should do it again next year and see what's changed. Please accept this Churchill Club speaker t-shirt as a small symbol of our gratitude. A recording of this program will be available maybe even tomorrow on our YouTube channel, where you can find recordings of most of our programs, so please check it out. Thanks again to Qualcomm, and you have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.